Namaskar. I'm Prakash Zog for Prakash on Basics. Let's look at the basic characteristics of Vedas after the initial discussion that we've already had. Some characteristics are logical, while some of them are traditionally accepted. I'm sure you can discern between them. Let's directly look into the characteristics of Vedas. They are supposed to be the oldest scriptures in the world. The closest to them is Zend Avesta, the Parsi or the Zoroastrian scripture. The Hebrew scripture of Torah is also quite old. But then the Vedas are, as we talked of last time, 4500 BC and earlier. That's a long time back. There are quite a few other old civilizations that we know of: Babylonian, Egyptian, Chaldean, Aramaic, Sumerian, Greek, Phoenician, Assyrians. But they have no scripture records as such. Or at least none of them have survived up to now. Then there are some other scriptures like Bible, the Old Testament or the New Testament for the Christians, the Quran for the Muslims, the Tripitak for the Buddhists, the Agam for the Jains, the Guru Granth Sahib for the Sikhs. But they are all much, much later. These Vedas are called as Shruti, sometimes referred to as Shruti Grantha. Shruta means what is heard, and these are the ones that are heard and passed on. They form a huge body of information passed on down the ages, only by oral transmission. From 4000 BC to date, 100% exact in terms of words, pronunciations, and intonations. How? Naturally, the answer is the uniqueness of Sanskrit, the language that is used to represent these. See, normally languages change every 100 years, even every 100 miles we have a different dialect or a different form of the language. It's possible that we could have languages that originate from Prakriti, that is nature. In the Indian subcontinent, such languages were called Prakrut, the languages that were naturally developed. In these early years, Pali that was used by the Buddhists and Ardhamagadi that was used by the Jains to a large extent were fairly old Prakrut languages. Today, India has more than 100 different languages and very large number of people speak these. The Vedas are in none of these languages, because had they been, by now they would have been distorted completely. What we hear, what we assimilate, and what we transmit is often quite distorted. Changing in content, in meaning is quite often. As a teacher, I am aware as to the information that I give to my students and how it changes gradually as it passes down the line. That is why Sanskrit, like I mentioned long back, from samskar, it's a processed language, processed beyond change, beyond deterioration. Sanskrit is the oldest and probably still one with the best grammatical rules that can be used for a language. These rules were compiled by Panini, the grammarian, in his treatise which is known as the Ashtadhyayi. It covers both oral as well as the written aspects of this language. What's unique about Sanskrit? Let's look at an example to understand things. Think of milk. Every day a bag comes to my house of milk, a pouch. If I forget to pick it up and take it inside, in a couple of hours it starts getting sour. So I have to boil it. That's one processing step. Still, it doesn't last much. So I convert it into curds. That gets sour after 5 or 6 days. So I convert it to butter. But keep it for a month and that goes bad too. So what the Indians usually do is to convert it into clarified butter, which is typically referred to as ghee. And that's pretty stable. It can last for years and years and years together. What you have done then is carried out a sanskar, or a irrevocable change, to stabilize it and improve it. Same way, Prakrit languages had a sanskar done on it and they converted to Sanskrit. And it is this processed language that is used for the Vedas. Sanskar is a typical purely Hindu concept. You must have sometimes heard of the 16 sanskars. They represent the various transition points, irreducible, in every part or change point of every human in India. We'll go into details of those sometime later. What's the other speciality of Vedas? They have a very typical transmission process which has been followed for 4,000 years, 5,000 years, 6,000 years. The transmission naturally involves a specialized learning process. The sheer volume of the information in Vedas is stupendous. The Vedas have about 15,000 plus mantras. The Rigveda has 10,552 mantras. And if you look at the learned people from India, they would have learned some other texts also, like the Vedangas and the Dharma Shastras and the Dharma Sutras and so forth. That's a great amount of work. How does it come down all the way up to here? The process is typically referred to as the Guru Shiksha Parampara. From the Guru, the master, to the student, and then passed on at every step. For anybody who wanted to learn Vedas, the learning process involved a minimum of 12 years, which will begin at the age of 8, 12 hours a day, no break, no Sundays, no other holidays. And then there were specific techniques that had been developed. I'll just give an example of a few of them that are used. The first one is known as the Grama part. Suppose you have a body of mantras. Then you begin with 1, 2, 2, 3, 3, 4, 4, 5, and so forth. That's the simplest form of repeating one and adding on the next one. And this was done over and over again a number of times. There was a second type which was known as the Jata part. You start with 1, 2 and reverse, that is 2, 1, and then again repeat 1, 2. I'll repeat 1, 2, 2, 1, 1, 2. In the next step, you add the next one and remove the previous one. So it becomes 2, 3, 3, 2, 2, 3. So naturally the next one will be 3, 4, 4, 3, 3, 4. This was known as the Jata part technique. There was another complex one, and that is known as the Ghana part. You take the first pair, reverse it, then they take the first 3, reverse them, and then repeat the first 3 again. So it's like saying 1, 2, 2, 1, 1, 2, 3, 3, 2, 1, and then again 1, 2, 3. That's one cycle. So you go to the next. Skip one like last time and add one extra. So it would become 2, 3, 3, 2, then 2, 3, 4, 4, 3, 2, and then 2, 3, 4. So naturally the next one would be 3, 4, 4, 3, 3, 4, 5, 5, 4, 3, and then again 3, 4, 5. And then you continue. How long? If you wanted to study Rigveda, 10,552 of these. And once is not enough. So it had to be recited over and over again a number of times. And that's how the learning process was carried out. The recitation process was usually a collective form. It wasn't one-to-one correspondence. The whole group would sit together and start singing. And it had to have proper intonations, proper paces, and so forth. Even later, when these were put to use during the rituals, they were usually not by one single person, but collectively by a number of Brahmins who would go about this process together, collectively. Even this doesn't seem to be enough. There were special texts that were designed to help the learning process. I'll go into details of some of them later on. 6 of them were there. They were known as the Vedangas. 2 of them were very important as far as the learning process was concerned. They are known as the Shiksha, which deals with the word pronunciations at every step, and Chanda, because many of them had to be sung. So there had to be special meters that had to be designed for the recitation process to remember them very conveniently. You must have heard, some of you all must have heard of the Gayatri. Gayatri is actually a Chanda. Anushtup is one more Chanda. Jagati is another Chanda. So there were quite a few Chandas of this sort. The 4 Vedas, the 6 Vedangas, making it a total of 10. The one who knew all these 10 by heart, for instant recall at any instant, was called a Dasha Granthi Brahman, master of 10 texts. Like all normal human beings, naturally, only the best learned everything. The rest of them were like average students, and they couldn't really cope up with all this amount of hard work. So they stuck to studying only 1 or 2 of the Vedas that were a tradition in their own families. There was therefore naturally a selective study process that went on. And family-wise, traditionally, they kept on repeating the same Vedas as a part of their study. This can be noticed very easily from the surnames that are there in India. You must have heard many of them. Bedi is the one that originates from Vedi, which means the one who knows one Ved. And then there is the Dvivedi. Dvi means 2. So the one who has learnt 2 Vedas is the Dvivedi. A Trivedi is the one who has learnt 3 Vedas. And then there is a Chaturvedi who has learnt all the 4 Vedas. And there is one more related surname that's known as Shukla. Now the Atharva Ved, which I'll go into details later on, is split into 2 parts. The Yajurved. The Krishna Yajurved and the Shukla Yajurved. And the ones who studied the Shukla Yajurved were called the Shukla Yajurvedis, but shortened to Shukla. So even surnames were accordingly decided by the type of Vedas that people studied. Now, what else? Vedas are said to be apaurushaya, not of human origin. That's how the word breaks down to. This implies that it's supposed to be of divine origin. Let's look at it from the logical point of view. If you look at the body of the Vedas that are there and the number of mantras that I just mentioned and the suktas and so forth, there are just too many contributors to all this. And their contributions are not equal. So there are unequal contributors. And each of these contributors are rishis or gurus, and they had their own traditional disciples, dedicated followers, who believed only in them to a very large extent. So it was quite logical that an unconditional acceptance of some other teacher's work may not exist in totality. That is doubtful. But then people wanted Vedas to remain something that was followed by everyone unquestionably. Better than to put it beyond the human creation. So the creator was the Lord himself. And as I mentioned last time, it was credited to Brahmadev. Then it was believed that the Vedas are a storehouse of all knowledge. Let's think of this carefully. All knowledge at the time of its compilation in the Indian subcontinent. That's about 3,500, 4,000 years BC that we are talking of. Upanishads a little later, so we could say about 3,000 years BC. 3,000 years past from today. I'm sure all of us realize that knowledge is something like population. It grows exponentially with time. What we've learned in the last 25 years is more than what we learned in the last 50 years before that, and the 100 years before that, and the 200 and the 500 and the 1,000 and the 2,000 and the 10,000 years before that. Obviously the same thing must have happened at the time of the Vedas also. So claiming that it has even present day knowledge, I think, is a bit too far-fetched. So Vedas had a knowledge of quite a few areas relevant at that time. But there is something else. Some areas like philosophy and logic and ethics, morals, analytical techniques, and a lot of mathematics that was developed at that time, these are all timeless areas, independent of any time frame. And the Vedas deal with all of them. And these then are valid even today. In the Vedas, the word sequence is mandatory. You just can't change things as you want. It differs from normal behavior patterns in languages as far as Sanskrit is concerned. Due to the beauty of Sanskrit grammar, the sequence of words within a sentence has no effect on the meaning, because there are so many different patterns in which the word is put forward. So it doesn't really matter how you place the words, the meaning would come out to be the same. But the effectiveness and the power of Vedic mantras is based on sound energy. And so the sequence of pronunciations, the intonations, the way in which they are presented, the level of voice modulations that go on, that can never be altered. If it has to be effective, these have to remain consistently the same. If they are altered, it is said to be Avedic. That means not belonging to the Vedas. But I'll make a slight change in what I'm saying just now. The Vedas are a representation of Sanskrit language itself. The first rucha of Rigveda, which is Om Agnimele Purohitam, and it continues, so another 2 lines. From this first Vedic rucha, if you analyze the words and the vowels that are present, all the major words and vowels that you need are already there in the first rucha. So when the Guru teaches you all this, he is also teaching you the way in which the language has been evolved, produced, processed and utilized by the people. And Sanskrit is the base of all the languages that are present in India. So it's the foundation of all languages in the Indian subcontinent. There is one more aspect. I refer to a sentence, but what about groups of sentences? The Vedas are said to have shakhas. The word shakha means a branch. Actually, it means the different redentions of the Veda that are used. and there are their traditional followers also. For example, I belong to the Hiranyakashi Shaka of the Yajurveda. Similarly, there are others also. The Shaka gives the sequence or the priorities of mantras that one must use in a particular Veda. And so naturally, with different gurus, they decided that this was more important and than that. They couldn't skip anything, but the priorities could be changed. The meaning finally remained the same. I'll give an example in an Indian context. I'm sure many of us have attended marriages not only from our own community and area, but from North India, from Maharashtra, from South India, from Bengal, and so forth. The rituals and the mantras that are used in all of them are the same, but their priorities are different. Even within Maharashtra, you would have 2 or 3 different traditions, and they would be based on the type or the area in which you belong. The same functions and rituals would be carried out in North India at night, while in Maharashtra, it would be early mornings. In South India, it will be at a different time schedule spread over a couple of days. Mantras are the same, but the sequencing is different, the priorities given are different. That's what is based on the shakha that is being used. Well, what do the traditions say? They say something more about the Vedas. They say that Vedas are everlasting from the beginning of the universe. They are a divine production. It's like saying that first the Veda and then the world. First the laws, first the blueprint to make the structure, and then the structure itself. Because Indian tradition believes, old tradition believes, that there are very huge yearly cycles known as kalpas. Details and the number of years and so forth I'll talk of sometime later. And in every kalpa, there would be a repetition of everything that has taken place, and there would be the same teachers and everybody else and so forth. They would be in different forms, but the blueprint, which is the Vedas, are transmitted by the Lord from one kalp to another, from one person, one Vyas from this kalpa to another Vyas in another kalpa. Since the blueprint is the same, there can be no alteration, and so no one has the right to make an alteration even in the sequence of what is being talked of. They are said to be perfect, faultless. They are supposed to be the best faultless source of all knowledge in Hinduism. If it is faultless, it must be divine. And if you look at it from the corollary point of view, if it has a divine origin, it has to be faultless. So these are some of the basic general characteristics of what Vedas are. I'll talk on the structure of Vedas, what they contain, and its details next time. If you found this information useful, please like and subscribe to this channel. Please tell your friends who are like-minded if they are interested in gathering and learning more things about Indian culture. Till we meet again, Namaskar.